Alrighty, we are going to get started with the Colorado Food Program training today on meal pattern requirements. The first part we're going to talk about is meal patterns and food components. So there are three meal patterns in the CACFP. Breakfast, lunch, and supper are the same meal pattern, and then snack, regardless of the time that it's served, has the same meal pattern. And then each meal pattern is broken out into a variety of age groups for their portion size requirements. Infants are broken into birth through 5 months, and then 6 through 11 months, which takes the infants all the way to their first birthday. The child meal pattern is divided from 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 12 years, and 13 to 18 years. And then the adult meal pattern is for anyone ages 18 and up. And as we go through a lot of these slides, links to various resources are going to get dropped in the chat box. And please continue to ask questions, unmute, or just drop those in the chat box as well. Yes, and I see a question here asking about what a meal pattern is. And we'll kind of get through that in the next couple slides. So if you still have questions and want clarification, just let me know once I kind of get through the next couple slides. Thanks. Alrighty, so there are 5 food components in the CACFP, and each meal has a different requirement for which and how much of all of these components are served. The first one is grains. The second is meat or meat alternate, such as yogurt. The third is fluid milk. The fourth is fruit. And the fifth is vegetables. And we're going to go through all of these components in depth with lots of examples for you. Alrighty, so this is the breakfast meal pattern. So of those previously listed 5 components, breakfast requires 3. So the 3 that are required are fluid milk, a fruit, vegetable, or portions of both, such as berries, banana, potato, tomatoes, applesauce. And then the third is a grain. Now the grain can be substituted for a meat or meat alternate up to 3 times per week. Grain options we typically see at breakfast include pancakes, bagels, cereal, and some grain or meat alternates we often see at breakfast include eggs, yogurt, or ham. The lunch and supper meal pattern requires all 5 food components to be served. This includes fluid milk, meat alternates, grains, fruit, and vegetables. Meat or meat alternates that we often see at lunch or supper include chicken, beans, cheese, and peanut butter. Grains typically include bread, tortillas, pasta, or rice. Fruits, orange, melon, pineapple. Vegetables, peas, carrots, mashed potatoes. All of those would count as vegetables. And then for snack, 2 components are required to be served, but you can choose any 2 of the components as long as they're different. So you can kind of mix and match these. And this is usually the meal that we see the most creativity. So you must choose 2 of the 5. So either fluid milk, meat alternate, grain, fruit, or vegetable. Some common foods we see at snacks include hummus, cheese stick, yogurt, crackers, pretzels, popcorn, raisins, cuties, apple slices, cucumber coins, or red pepper sticks. These are all allowable components for snacks. The adult meal pattern is the same, just with different portion sizes. So for breakfast for adults, it also includes 3 components: fluid milk, fruit, vegetable, or combination of both, and a grain or a meat alternate may be substituted 3 times per week. Lunch and supper require all 5 components: fluid milk, meat alternate, grain, fruit, and vegetable. And then snack is 2 of the 5. So the meal patterns are decided by USDA, and all the portion sizes are based on the age of the participants. The portion sizes are based on providing 2/3 of the daily requirements for all participants. This is because often, children and adults are, yes, we are going to send these all out at the end of the training in an email. Yep, all the links, the PowerPoint, the recording, you guys are going to get a copy of everything that you see today. So the portion sizes are based on providing 2/3 of the participants' daily needs. So that's why the portion sizes change for the different age groups, because as kiddos get older and bigger, they need more food, right? And what you serve really has a big impact. So the food that you serve may be the only food that these kiddos or adults are eating all day, or it might be the freshest, or it might be the only chance that they get hot food. So take that into consideration when you're making your menus and making sure that you're serving them the most nutritious and the highest quality products that you can. There are lots of resources available from USDA for figuring out if different foods are creditable. So the crediting handbook is extremely helpful. I prefer to use the digital version because then I can search different food in there to see if it's creditable or to kind of help get guidance on some portion sizes. So the green chart on this slide is copied directly from the handbook. And this kind of gives you an idea of portion sizes for some of those vegetables that don't fit quite nicely in a little measuring cup to figure out, well, what does a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup of carrot sticks look like? They don't fit in that cup very well. So this chart kind of explains that if one carrot stick is 4 inches long and a 1/2 inch wide, 3 of those would provide a 1/4 cup of carrots. And then it has several other examples there. The purple chart is an example of determining if a product is creditable or not. So does it credit towards one of those 5 components we've already talked about? So the example on this slide is cream cheese. You can serve cream cheese, but it's considered more of a condiment. It doesn't have enough protein to credit as a meat alternate. So it does not count towards anything in the meal pattern. However, you can serve it. So think of it as if you were having syrup with pancakes or ketchup or ranch dressing, it's kind of like that, like an extra condiment to kind of add flavor. But those answers can be found in the crediting handbook, which is extremely helpful. Oops. All right, so now we're going to dive deep into each of the 5 components, and we're going to start with grains. All right, so we're going to go through some definitions here because there seems to be just in general lots of confusion about grains and what do all of these kind of unusual words mean. So the first definition we're going to go over is, well, what is a whole grain? So a whole grain contains all parts of the grain kernel, including the bran, germ, and endosperm. And some grains naturally occur as whole grains, such as oatmeal, brown rice, and whole corn. So if those items are on the ingredient list and it's just that product, it can be considered a whole grain. Now, whole grain rich is a little bit different. So this is a term designated by USDA, and it indicates that a grain product has between 50 and 100% whole grains, with all remaining grains being enriched. So think of this as a product that has some grains, but some other ingredients too, such as water, sugar, eggs. Think of it as products like bread. Oops, I need to move this. There we go. Bread, pasta, or cereal. So those would need to, or those can be whole grain rich, but not all of them are. And we're going to go through lots of examples on how to figure that out. All right, so the next definition is enriched grains. So this indicates the addition of one or more vitamins and minerals added to the food. It may also be listed as fortified. And it can look a little bit different on the nutrition facts label. Sometimes the ingredient list says exactly, vitamins and minerals and lists what's added. And sometimes it's a little more confusing to figure out, are these vitamins and minerals? So the second example here says, on the ingredient list contains 2% or less of, and it lists soybean oil, salt, um, sodium stearoyl lactate, ammonium sulfate, ascorbic acid, and calcium probionate. So these are vitamins and minerals that are added. They're just not called, vitamin B1, B6, kind of how you would typically identify it. So just be on the lookout and be aware for that. And the final definition we're going to go through is what a creditable green means. So this refers to green ingredients in a product that are eligible to credit towards the green component. So this includes things like whole grain flour, whole grain meal, whole corn masa, masa harina, hominy, enriched flour, enriched meal, and all brands and germs. And then the opposite of a creditable grain is a non-creditable grain. So these are grains that are neither whole grains nor enriched and are not eligible to credit towards the grain component. A non-creditable grain cannot be one of the first three grain ingredients when using the rule of three. And we're going to walk through the rule of three here in a few minutes. So some examples of some non-creditable grains include corn or cornmeal, nut or seed flour, such as almond flour, potato flour, and this is because potatoes are a vegetable, not a grain, semolina flour, barley malt or malted barley flour, bean flour, such as chickpea flour, oat fiber, or rice flour. Alrighty, so when you're serving grains in the CACFP, at least one serving of grains per day must meet the whole grain rich requirements. Grain-based desserts are not allowed to credit towards the grain component, and ounce equivalence is the required method of measurement for all grains in CACFP, and this rule went into effect on October 1st, 2021. We're going to walk through all those examples here in a minute. All right, so some examples of some allowable grains. So in order to serve grains in CACFP, the grains must be either whole grain, enriched, or meet the USDA criteria for whole grain rich. Some common errors that we see are tortillas, especially corn tortillas. If it lists the first ingredient as corn, it's not creditable. If the first ingredient is corn treated with lime, corn masa, or whole corn, those would be creditable corn tortillas. With pretzels, we often see that these may not be enriched with vitamins and minerals. So even if the first grain was a whole grain, but there's no enriched flours added, those would not be creditable. And then finally, we often see vegetable sticks or straws served, and those are often made with potato flour, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a vegetable and not a grain. So those are not creditable to be served. All institutions must serve one whole grain rich item per day. If your site only serves one meal per day, the grain component must be a whole grain. So for example, if you're an after-school site and you only serve supper and your supper includes a grain as required, that grain must be a whole grain. If your site only serves a snack, and a grain is one of the components you're choosing to serve, that grain also must be a whole grain. So, for example, if you served goldfish and milk, the goldfish would need to be a whole grain. If you served yogurt and fruit, that does not have a grain, so there is no whole grain rich requirement for that snack. If you served a peanut butter sandwich on bread, the bread would need to be whole grain. And if you served hummus with crackers, the crackers would need to be whole grain. So if there's a grain for a snack, and you're only serving one meal per day, that grain must be a whole grain. All right, some examples of some allowable grains include quick breads such as zucchini bread, banana bread, pumpkin bread, pretzels, as long as they're enriched or whole grain, animal crackers, graham crackers, muffins, pancakes, waffles, fish-shaped crackers, or cheddar crackers. Now we're going to walk through the 6 methods for identifying a product is whole grain rich. As long as a product meets one of the 6 methods, it's considered whole grain rich and can meet the whole grain rich requirement for the meal pattern. And Ari just dropped a link to a USDA resource that walks through these 6 as well. All right, so the first method is using the WIC list for any state. If a product is on the whole grain list, on the WIC list for any state, you can consider that and serve that and count it as your whole grain at your site. Ari also just dropped the Colorado WIC list in the chat box so that you guys can reference that. It gets updated every 6 months, so it always has new products on there. So make sure that you often, take a look and see what's on there. And it's a really helpful tool because our team is not allowed to share specific brands. However, WIC does. So you're able to take this WIC list to the grocery store and look at the exact brands that are on here and purchase those and knowing with confidence that you're purchasing whole grains. And it's just visual with the pictures on here. It's a really great step one, especially if you're training new staff or you want to, just introduce new products to your menu. It's a really great resource. So I highly recommend kind of making this your, whole grain go-to.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Uh, when you go to the supermarket, sometimes they have like WIC approved. Is
Mhm.
that a good way also if you don't have your list with you to kind of
Yeah.
like
Yeah, I would say that would be good. I would maybe double check if you buy it and you get back to your center, just double check that, the associate maybe just didn't stick the sticker on the wrong shelf or stick the wrong bread in front of the sticker. But I would say that's kind of a good tool to use as well. Great question.
thank you.
You're so welcome. Alrighty, so method number 2 is called the standard of identity. So the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration has a set of rules for what a product must contain to be legally labeled as whole wheat. And this only applies to bread products, including buns and rolls and pasta. All other grain products labeled as whole wheat must be determined using another method. So crackers, tortillas, bagels, biscuits, or other pasta shapes not listed on the next slide, you must use another method to determine if they're whole grain. But if it's a sliced bread, bun, roll, or pasta, and it says whole wheat, you can consider that to be a whole grain. It's a little confusing, so I have some examples. So all of these foods meet the FDA standard of identity. So if a bread says whole wheat bread, entire wheat bread, or graham bread, it meets whole grain rich criteria. If a product says whole wheat rolls, entire wheat rolls, or graham rolls, it meets whole grain rich criteria. If a product says whole wheat buns, entire wheat buns, or graham buns, it meets whole grain rich criteria. And finally, these pastas would meet the criteria as well. Whole wheat macaroni product, whole wheat macaroni, whole wheat spaghetti, and whole wheat vermicelli. And this list is available on page 79 of the crediting handbook that we shared earlier. So, a warning to those shopping and purchasing foods. Manufacturers love to get really smart and trick their consumers into purchasing something that is healthier and more wholesome than it really is. So manufacturers will falsely label products to try to trick you into thinking that they're whole grain. So this example on this slide says baked with whole wheat. It does not say, I'm going to go back a slide. It does not say whole wheat, entire wheat, or graham. And it's a cracker. So it does not fall into the FDA standard of identity for bread, buns, rolls, and pasta. So for this specific product, you can't just take what it says on the box. You can't just look at the words whole wheat and count that as a whole grain. You must do more investigating to figure out if it meets our criteria. Similar wording that you may see includes made with whole grain, made with whole wheat, or contains whole grain. If you recall from our definition earlier, to meet whole grain rich criteria, it must have between 50 and 100% of the grains, whole grains, but there's no rules on if a manufacturer just wants to say that it's baked with whole grain. It could be literally a sprinkle, and they could say baked with whole grain, but that doesn't mean that it meets the 50 to 100%. So method number 3 is the FDA statement. This means that a product contains one of the following statements exactly as written. So the two statements are diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease and some cancers. So as you can see in the picture on the slide, that statement is exactly on this package. The other option is diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in saturated fat and cholesterol may help reduce the risk of heart disease. And this method for determining whole grain only applies to CACFP, not any other child nutrition programs such as National School Lunch. All right, so oops, too busy clicking. We're going to do a quick knowledge check. So you may unmute or respond in the chat box for this question. So you see this waffle product at the store. Does this waffle meet whole grain rich criteria? Based on the information I've given you. Okay, so I see some answers coming in. Okay, so far all the answers are saying yes. However, that's incorrect. These do not meet whole grain rich criteria. Emily, I love your reaction. Thank you. That just made my day. Based on the information on the slide, this does not meet whole grain rich criteria. So it does say whole grain. However, this is not a bread, bun, roll, or pasta. It's a waffle. So you're not able to just take the word whole grain at face value and consider it whole grain rich. For this product, you would have to look at it is a trick question. That's why I did it, because it's hard. So you would have to look at the ingredient list or use another method to determine if this is whole grain rich. Great. See, and a lot of the examples I share are really hard and tricky, but that's why I share them, because we see people get tricked by these, and we don't want you to get tricked because you're coming to training. So that's why we do, a lot of our examples are really hard. All right. Method number 4 is if a product meets the whole grain rich criteria under the National School Lunch Program, it counts as whole grain rich for CACFP as well. The one caveat is grain-based desserts and cereal sugar limit requirements still apply to these grains. So if it's a grain-based dessert or over the sugar limit for CACFP, even if it meets the whole grain rich criteria, it would not be eligible to be served for reimbursement in CACFP. All right. So method number 5, and one that is a little tricky, but really important to learn, is called the rule of 3. So as long as the food meets the rule of 3 criteria, you can consider it to be whole grain rich. And what this means is if the first ingredient or the second ingredient after water is a whole grain, and the next 2 grain ingredients, if any, are whole grain, enriched, bran, or germ, that product is eligible to be claimed as whole grain rich. This method was developed by USDA to help support CACFP operators that frequently shop in retail grocery stores and don't always have access to the manufacturer's product formulation statement or specialized products like a lot of school food authority programs do. So by following the rule of 3, you are able to determine that that product meets that 50 to 100% whole grain in the product. So this is all of the nutrition consultants' kind of go-to resource for determining using the rule of 3. And we're going to walk through some examples here. And then this resource is also going to get shared in the chat box. So on page 5 of that resource is this list. And this is a list of whole grain ingredients. So if the first ingredient or the second ingredient after water, it must be on this whole grain list. And then the next 2 grain ingredients, if any, must either be a whole grain. So back on the previous slide on page 5 of the resource, or it may be an enriched or a bran or germ. And this list is on page 6 of the resource we provided. For the rule of 3, a non-creditable grain cannot be one of the first 3 grain ingredients. And the non-creditable grains and flours are listed on page 6 of the resource and include barley malt, corn fiber, degermed corn, farina, malted barley flour, oat fiber, potato flour, rice flour, semolina flour. And then it may get a little confusing. So on this list, it says wheat flour, and that's because it doesn't say whole wheat or enriched wheat. So if it just says wheat flour, that would not be creditable because it's not a whole grain and it's not enriched. So it can't be one of the first 3 grain ingredients. And then there are other ingredients called grain derivatives, and these are able to be disregarded. So you can just ignore these if you see them on the ingredients list. And this list is on page 2 of the resource we provided. So some examples here are cellulose fiber, cornstarch, rice starch, water, wheat, gluten, or anything that follows the phrase contains 2% or less of. So any of those ingredients you can ignore. All right, the final method for determining whole grain rich before we jump into some examples is manufacturer documentation. So this has a couple different ways that this could look. So if it's commercially prepared or homemade, you could have this type of documentation. So you would get a product formulation statement from a commercially prepared product. And this would certify that at least 50% of the grains in that product are whole grain. And then you could consider that whole grain rich. If it's a homemade product, you would typically have a standardized recipe. And this would document, again, that at least 50% of the grains are whole grains. And finally, another option is if the product has a child nutrition or CN label. This is most commonly seen if it is a combination food, such as pizza, that contains grain and at least one other component, such as cheese, which would be a meat alternate on pizza. And this would be valid for verification if the item includes a grain component and the grain component is listed on the CN label. All right, next slide has some examples of these. So again, the first one is the product formulation statement. So this is a template that's available from USDA. So that way you kind of have an idea of what it might look like. A standardized recipe may just be as simple as seeing a bread recipe that calls for 2 cups of whole wheat flour and 2 cups of enriched flour. So that would mean the total recipe is 4 cups, and half of that is 2 cups, which is whole wheat. So you could consider that homemade bread whole grain rich. And then the final example is a child nutrition label. And there's an example on this side, but we're going to dive a lot more into CN labels in the meat alternate section. These are some examples of insufficient documentation. So just because the product has the whole grain stamp does not mean that it meets the whole grain rich criteria for CACFP. You would need to use another method to determine if it meets our criteria. Sometimes these products contain some whole grains, but they may contain high amounts of non-creditable grains as well, and that's why it's not sufficient documentation. Another example is if the ingredient list has the allergy statement that a product contains wheat. This is just for allergy purposes. This does not tell us how much whole grain is in the product, so it is insufficient documentation for whole grain rich criteria. All right, so well, what about cereal? So cereal has a little bit different rules, but the benefit is they're a little more simple. So if a ready-to-eat breakfast cereal, like a cold cereal, you would typically serve with milk. If the first ingredient is a whole grain or the second ingredient after water, and it's fortified with vitamins and minerals, it's considered whole grain. So you don't have to do the rule of 3 with cereal. You just have to verify the first grain and then verify that it's enriched or fortified. The caveat with cereals, both hot and cold, is that they cannot contain more than 6 grams of total sugar per dry ounce. That is the current requirement effective October 1st of this year. The requirement is changing slightly to use no more than 6 grams of added sugars per dry ounce. So it's transitioning from referencing the total sugar to the added sugar. All cereals on the Colorado WIC list are allowable in CACFP, so it's a great starting point. And there are actually more cereals on the list that meet our whole grain rich criteria that does not meet WIC's whole grain rich criteria. And I have an example on the next slide. And there is a sugar limit chart for cereals to help you determine if a product meets the criteria. So here is the current Colorado WIC food list cereal. So again, a really great visual. You know, it really shows that there are lots of choices out there that meet the sugar limits. All of these that have the little star asterisk on it are whole grain for WIC. And like I said, there are even more that meet whole grain for us. So you could verify that. But again, all of these meet the sugar limit, which is a really helpful starting point. And it's, again, helpful that it's updated every 6 months because a lot of these flavors change. Some go away and then some new ones get added, like the left side on the second row, the Cheerios veggie blend, blueberry and banana. That's a pretty new one. And so it just got added, which is exciting. All right. So we're going to dive into some requirements for menu documentation. So your menu does need to clearly indicate if a product is your whole grain for the day. This is not only important for your families, but it's important when your nutrition consultants come for your review. We want to see very clearly and obviously what whole grains you're serving. So there's a variety of ways that you could document this. You could just spell out the words whole grain. You could use abbreviations like WG or WW, or you could put the little star and then have a footer at the bottom of your menu that says, all products with this mark are whole grain rich. Grain-based desserts and other sweetened grains are not eligible for reimbursement in CACFP. Some examples of these include sweetened popcorn, cookies, pastries, pie, pudding, and cakes. Those are all a lot more obvious. One that is often tricky that we still see on menus is bars. Cereal bars, breakfast bars, granola bars are not creditable in CACFP. So if it looks like a bar, talks like a bar, if it's called a bar, it is not creditable in CACFP. So some places, may have a homemade banana bread and they cut it up into little squares and they call it banana bars. But really, it's banana bread. So just be really careful when you're naming things on your menu. Don't use the word cake, don't use the word bar. You call them, those creditable type products if they are. If it's banana bread, call it banana bread. Um, and if you ever have questions, you can reach out to your nutrition consultant and let us know. Again, we see lots of unusual things, and we kind of decide as a team, together if it's something that's allowable or not. Because again, the manufacturers, they get really creative and really smart to try to serve all kinds of unusual things. All right, so grain ounce equivalence is the required method of measuring grains. Again, this went into effect October 1st of 2021. We have a whole training specific to whole or grain ounce equivalent, so we're not going to dive into the weeds on this. And there is a resource that just got dropped in the chat box as well. Okay, so now we're going to go through a food activity. So I'm going to be launching a poll for the different grains that I'm going to put on the screen. We're going to walk through if these products are whole grain or if they're creditable at all. So if you are able to, I would highly recommend pulling up the whole grain resource we shared earlier. Ari, will you actually drop that in the chat box again so people don't have to scroll up and find it? Because that will kind of help you as you're looking at these different grains. So let's see. All right, we're going to launch this poll. Okay, so are these Bear Bites creditable? And if they are they whole grain rich? So I'll walk through this example with you all. So we will look at the ingredient list. So the first ingredient listed here is graham flour. In parentheses, it says whole grain wheat flour. So since we see that word whole, we know that that's a whole grain. So that means that the first ingredient is a whole grain. So to follow rule of three, we have to look at grains number 2 and 3. So the second grain is unbleached enriched flour. So since it's enriched, that's creditable as grain number 2. And then we go all the way through the parentheses there. And then the next ingredients are maltodextrin, salt, baking soda, cinnamon, soy lecithin, and natural flavor. So all of those are disregard ingredients. So there is no grain number 3. So since our first green ingredient is a whole grain and our second green ingredient is enriched, this would be whole grain rich. I will show you the answers there. I'm going to end the poll for you all so you can see how well you did. Alrighty, so now I have another example. So go ahead and start looking at these ingredients while I get the next poll up. So what about these graham crackers? Now, when it comes to looking at whole grains, it's important to look at the ingredient list for the specific product you're buying. Not all graham crackers are made the same. Some are creditable, some are not. So it's important to look at the specific ingredients on exactly what you're buying. Give you guys a couple more seconds here. These polls are anonymous, but I really appreciate who just checked the unsure box because I feel like that's so honest and I love that. You're here to learn. You're not afraid. You're like, I don't know. I love that. All right, we are going to end this poll and walk through this one together. All right. So for this one, the first grain ingredient is unbleached enriched flour. So it does not say whole. If we look in the parentheses, it says wheat flour. Again, there's no word that says whole. So the first grain ingredient is enriched. So this does not meet whole grain rich criteria. However, you could serve these. It's an allowable food and it's enriched. So you could serve these, but it would not be your whole grain for the day. Let's do some more examples. Again, these are tricky. That's why I picked them. So if you're not getting them right, that's okay. Oops. Let's see. Oh, our bucket O pretzels. So what do we think about these? So our ingredients are wheat flour, salt, vegetable oil, maltodextrin, yeast, acidity regulators, natural flavors. Right. Looks like I got most of the answers in here. So great job. The majority got this correct. So this is, oops, did not share. There we go. So these are not creditable. So the first ingredient is not a whole grain. It is not enriched, and there is no vitamins or minerals added to these pretzels. So these would not be creditable. So if these were served on your menu, we would have to take back the reimbursement for every meal that these were served for the entire month. So if you have pretzels, when you are done with this training, go look at them and check them out. And if you're not sure, send us a picture so that we can help you make sure that you're serving creditable foods. All right. Next one. So what about this fruit and grain bar? Let's look at our ingredients. It says the crust is whole grain oats. The second ingredient is enriched flour. And then the third grain ingredient is whole wheat flour. All right. I think I got most of the answers here. So these are not creditable because it's considered a grain-based dessert, because it's considered a granola bar. So again, if it looks like a bar, talks like a bar, thinks it's a bar, It's considered a bar in CACFP and is not creditable. So again, if this was served on your menu and we came for a review, we would take back the reimbursement for every single time this was served on the menu. Alrighty. So these are going to get a little trickier because the tortillas and the tortilla chips are really challenging. That's why we're going to walk through them together. So let's look at the ingredient list on this product. So the ingredients are corn, vegetable oil, and salt. So would this be creditable or whole grain? Wow, there's a lot of people getting this right. That's so exciting because this one's hard. All right, I got a couple more answers trickling in. I'm gonna wait a couple more seconds here. Awesome. Amazing. 65% of you got this right, which is amazing. So these are not creditable. The first ingredient is corn. It is not whole corn or one of the creditable versions of corn for this to be considered a grain. It is also not enriched in any way. So that means that, again, if these were served on your menu, every time these were served, we would take back the reimbursement for that whole meal every single time. All right. So to help kind of show you that not all products are created equal, you have to look at the ingredients on your specific products. Here is an example of a different tortilla chip. So this one, the ingredients are corn masa flour, water, vegetable oil, and sea salt. What do we think about this? All right, I think I got most of the answers here. Let's see. All right, so this one is a tricky one. So these are creditable and they are whole grain because corn masa flour is a whole grain. It's on the page 6 of that resource we shared, and there's no other grain ingredients listed. So these are a whole grain. So this could be your whole grain for the whole day. All right. Got another one here. We see this product a lot, and it really seems to trick people. So let's look at the ingredients on these mini pancakes. The first ingredient is enriched wheat flour. The second ingredient is water, and then we have high fructose corn syrup, buttermilk, soybean oil, and then there's no other grains listed in here. All right, give you guys a couple more seconds here. All right. So these are creditable. You can serve pancakes. However, these are not whole grain because the first grain ingredient is enriched. So these are not whole grain, but pancakes are eligible to serve. Okay. Now we're going to go through a couple different bread options because there's so many varieties out there. So this is a honey wheat bread. Let's look at the ingredients here. The first green ingredient is enriched wheat flour. So what does that tell you? All right, you guys are getting the hang of this. I got up to 54 people, or 54% of people have the right answer. That's great. Give you guys a couple more seconds to get the answers coming in. Yay. All right, I'm going to end this poll. All right, so most folks did get it correct. So this is creditable. Emily, I love your vibe. Your reactions are just fire today. I love it so much. Thank you. Um, but th this product is not whole grain rich. The first grain ingredient is enriched wheat flour. So as soon as you see that word enriched, you know that it's not a whole grain. So you don't even have to worry about what else is on the label. You know it's not a whole grain. You can serve it. You just need to make sure that you have another whole grain that day.
So even though it says as the fourth ingredient, whole wheat flour, because it's because of where it is and
Mm-hmm.
because enriched was first,
Yep.
it negates it, right?
It does, yes. So
Okay.
the way the ingredients are listed on a nutrition facts label is they're listed by quantity. So the first ingredient is always the most. So there's the most enriched flour in the whole product. And by the time we get all the way down to number four, there's just not going to be enough to meet that 50 to 100% in there. So that's kind of why that is. All right. And so this, even though it's a bread, in theory, it would fall under that standard of identity. It doesn't say one of those phrases that we showed earlier where it says entire wheat or whole wheat. It just says honey wheat. So just because it's the color brown and it says wheat, it does not automatically mean that it's a whole grain. Again, they get so tricky. All right. So this is another tricky one. So again, a bread, so could potentially fall under the standard of identity. But if we look at the package, it says white made with whole grain. So think back, was that one of the phrases that falls under the standard of identity? And then if you're unsure about that, you can always look at the ingredient list. So if we look at the ingredient list, it says enriched wheat flour. So as soon as you see that word enriched, your little alarm should go off in your head and say, that's not a whole grain. Getting a couple more answers here. Gonna hang tight for just a minute. Right, I'm gonna end this poll. So this is creditable. It's not whole grain. So you could serve this. Um, but it does not meet the whole grain rich criteria. And a lot of these breads that are trying really hard to look a lot healthier than they are, they're a lot more expensive. So sometimes it's easier just to buy the simpler ones and not also try to decipher through all of their weird wording and all of these ingredients. Sometimes simpler is better. All right, so this is our next one. So again, sliced bread could potentially fall under the standard of identity. And if we look at this, it does say 100% whole wheat on the package. And if we're unsure if that's one of our standard of identity phrases, again, we can always look at the ingredient list, which the first ingredient is whole wheat flour. So we see that word whole. The second ingredient is water. The third ingredient is wheat gluten, which we can ignore. And then there's yeast, sugar, oil, cracked wheat, wheat bran, salt, honey, molasses, and then there's no other green ingredients. All right, I'm gonna end this one. Look at you guys go. 93% got this correct. So yes, this is credible and it's whole grain. This was one of my examples of just get something that says 100% whole wheat on it. Simple, easy, a lot less work for you. Because whole grains is hard, so make it as simple on yourself as possible. Alrighty, so oops, hold on. Here we go. Okay. Veggie sticks. Are these creditable? And if they are they whole grain? Wait, gonna let a couple more answers come in here. Okay. Awesome job, guys. Majority got that right, 63% of you. So these are not creditable. And if you're unsure, again, always look at the ingredients. The first ingredient in this is potato starch. So that's not a grain, that's a vegetable. So these would not count as a grain at all. And even though they include, spinach powder, the tomato paste, those are not identifiable as vegetables visually in this product. So these are not creditable at all. So if these were served, we would take back the reimbursement for the whole meal for every time these were served. It's basically a glorified potato chip, to be honest. Okay. Oh, shoot. All right. Next one. Ah, there we go. Alrighty. So these are tricky. So this is an English muffin. It does say 25 grams of whole grain. However, we shared earlier that just because it says that does not always mean that it's enough information. It does also say 100% whole wheat. However, this is an English muffin. It is not considered a sliced bread, bun, roll, or pasta. So this you would have to follow the rule of three. This would not meet the standard of identity. So you would need to follow the rule of three and look at the ingredients to make sure and determine if this is whole grain. So if we look at the ingredients, the first one is whole wheat flour. So that is a whole grain. However, we have to look for grains number 2 and 3. So the next ingredient is water. And then the next grain is farina. And if you have that resource pulled up, you will see that farina is a non-creditable grain because it's not enriched. So I'm going to end this poll and give you guys the answer. So these are credible. You can serve them. However, they're not whole grain because that farina is the second grain ingredient and it's not enriched. This does not meet the rule of three. Now, our team has tried for years to get a product formulation statement from the manufacturer for this product to see if the whole wheat flour exceeds 50%, and they will not give us documentation for that. So these cannot count as your whole grain for the day. You can serve them if you choose. However, you would need to have another whole grain that day. Very, very tricky. Okay. So we've just a couple left here. Oops. I keep forgetting to close a poll before I try to open the next one. Alrighty, so we have this homemade banana bread. So this is our recipe on the slide here. So if we look at the ingredients, you would look at this just like you would look at another ingredient list. So it says whole wheat flour, 3¼ cups. And we're going to look through the rest of the recipe to see if there's any other grains listed. And there's not. The other ingredients are sugar, non-fat milk, baking powder, baking soda, eggs, water, spices. So there's no other grains. So that would mean 100% of the grains in this bread are whole grain because it says whole wheat flour. Right. And this one. All right, 55% of you got it right. Great job. So this is creditable. This is considered a quick bread, and it is whole grain. Because the one and only grain is a whole grain, so this would meet whole grain rich criteria. So you could serve this, and it would be your whole grain for the day. And this is actually a USDA recipe if you wanted to find it and use it. Okay, so what about this one? So we have homemade cinnamon cake. It does look delicious. I feel like it would go very well with my coffee that is cold now. So let's look at the ingredients on this. So the ingredients, butter, sugar, vanilla extract. Okay, so it does say all-purpose flour. What do we think? Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and end this one. Great job. 93% of you got this correct. So this is not creditable. It falls under the grain-based dessert category. So this would not be eligible for a reimbursement. If this was served, we would have to take back the reimbursement for the entire meal every time this was on your menu, despite how delicious it looks. All right. And this is our final example here. Pita pockets are kind of another one that falls into the really tricky category that manufacturers, they get really creative with the way that they label some of these. So this would not fall in the standard of identity because it's not a sliced bread, bun, roll, or pasta. So we can't look at the whole wheat words on the package. We have to look at the ingredients. See lots of concentrating happening. I love it. Give you guys a couple more seconds to figure it out. All right. Great job. This is a tricky one, and 57% of you got it correct. So this is credible. However, it's not whole grain. So let's look at the ingredients together. The first one is whole wheat flour, but we have to find grain ingredients 2 and 3, right? So the next ingredient is water, wheat gluten, which we can ignore, but we still have to keep going. The next ingredient is oat fiber, and then potato flour. Both of those are on the non-creditable grains list on page 6 of the resource we shared. So this would not meet the rule of 3 because grain ingredients 2 and 3 are non-creditable. So even though the first grain ingredient is a whole grain, this would not meet the criteria based on the rule of 3. Oh goodness, I didn't share the results. I apologize. There we go. Okay, any questions? Does anyone want to unmute or have me walk through any of these again? Kind of give you guys a minute to take the floor here if you have any questions.
Natalie, I'm kind of confused about the whole corn thing. Because at the beginning of the presentation, there was a spot that said something about corn being okay, but there's got to be some specific iteration of it.
Yes. So if it says, so it has to do with how the corn is processed, whether it can count as a whole grain or not. So if it just says corn, it doesn't count as a whole grain. But if it says whole corn or corn masa or corn masa flour, those are processed in a way that makes it eligible to be a whole grain. And so kind of after we get through the rest of the presentation, I'm going to show you guys some resources and I'll pull up where it kind of gives you more information because it is very confusing. The crediting handbook has a great explanation. So I'll pull that up before we hop off for the day and show you that because it is really confusing. But again, that's why like the WIC list is super helpful because it has corn tortillas on there and you can just use those. They did all the hard work for you.
I have one question then. What if you're not using it as your whole grain? Can you use corn as your grain?
Like scoops of like corn.
No,
like
no, like tortilla, like for the corn tortilla.
I mean, can it be your grain? Is that what you said?
Yeah, let's just say you're making enchiladas. Can we use that as your grain? It's not your whole grain for the day, but it's your grain for, let's just say, your lunch menu.
Yeah, as long as it is enriched. Some of the corn tortillas are not enriched.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So you're basically saying just the word corn is not even a creditable.
Correct. Yep. I'm going to try not to make you guys seasick, but I'm going to click back a couple slides to show you here. So like this one, for example, it just says corn. And if you look on page 6 of the resource, it lists that as a non-creditable grain.
Gotcha.
However, this one that says corn masa flour, so that has to do with how the corn is processed. And so that is listed on the whole grain list on page 5.
So corn masa flour is both creditable and whole grain.
Yes.
And then just corn is neither creditable in any kid's situation.
Yes.
Okay.
So if it's like in a grain product, if it's like a scoop of corn is your side, that would be like a vegetable. But if it's in a product like this, if it just says corn, it would not be creditable.
Okay. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Any other questions or any other examples that you guys want me to go back to? Okay. All right. And again, if you ever have questions, if you see a new product that you're like, I think my center would really like this, but I don't know if it's credible, you can always send us a picture or a link, and we're happy to look at it for you. All right. So again, warning, not going to make you seasick, but I'm going to click forward through the slides to get back to where we were. Okay. Alrighty. Well, I get to pass the mic off to Amy. She's going to take over and talk about meat alternates, and fluid milk. Thank you, Amy.
Hey guys. So talking about our meat and meat alternate sections. You want to go forward, Natalie? So these are some examples of meat alternates. They include things such as eggs, cheese, beans, yogurt, soy yogurt, peanut or nut butters, nuts and seeds, and tofu. So in regards to beans, so 1/4 of a cup is equal to 1 ounce equivalent for meat. 3/8 of a cup is 1.5 ounces, and 1/2 a cup is that 2 ounce equivalent for your meat alternate. Beans can be served any variety. So there's white, red, black, garbanzo, pinto, all are okay, including lentils. And you can serve them either, well, you can buy them either dried, canned, or frozen and serve them in any way you like. Another meat alternate is yogurt. So these are the serving sizes for lunch and supper. So 4 ounces or 1/2 a cup is equal to 1 ounce of meat for 1 to 2-year-olds. So that's the serving size for them. 6 ounces is required for 3 to 5-year-olds. That's 1.5 ounces of meat. And then 8 ounces is required for your 6 to 12-year-olds to meet the 2 ounce meat requirement. Serving size for snack is a little bit less than those, but you can find that on our meal pattern. And you can serve flavored or plain yogurt. Both are creditable as long as they meet the sugar requirements, which I'll talk about later. So soy yogurt is also creditable, and a new rule just came out, and it is now creditable for infants as well. Homemade soy yogurt is not creditable just due to food safety concerns. And the minimum requirement for soy yogurt is the same as your dairy yogurt. So 1/2 of a cup or 4 fluid ounces is equal to 1 meat alternate. All right, so the sugar requirements for yogurt. So as I mentioned, you can serve plain, flavored, sweetened, or unsweetened yogurt. The current sugar requirements are no more than 23 grams of total sugar per 6 ounces. However, starting on October 1st, 2025, and you should have all received, or someone at your center should have received an email about this, the sugar requirements will be changing for yogurt, and we'll focus on more of the added sugar components. So no more than 12 grams of added sugar per 6 ounces. Other products or yogurts that are not allowable or not creditable, these include things such as frozen yogurts, drinkable yogurt products. That doesn't include like Go-Gurts. Those are the same consistency as a regular yogurt. So those wouldn't be considered those drinkable yogurt products. Homemade yogurts, due to safety concerns, any kind of yogurt bar or yogurt covered with fruit or nut, those are not allowable or creditable. All right, so these are the current sugar requirements. So going based off of the total sugars. So this is a product example or nutrition label. So I don't know if you want to put it in the chat. When looking at this chart, does this yogurt meet the current sugar limit requirement? So you're going to look at your serving size, which is 8 ounces or 227 grams, and then the total sugar is 9 grams. So I guess just throw it in the chat if you think this is creditable or not. Great. Yes, I am seeing some yeses come through. So yes, this is creditable. And then just to kind of point out what will be changing. So instead of looking at that total sugar limits in October 2025, you'll be starting to look at that bottom added sugar number. So right now this one says includes 0 grams of added sugar. So you can see that this one would also meet those new requirements as well, just because there's no added sugar at all. Right. And so that's just showing you kind of how to use those charts. And I believe Ari put in, yes, she put in the sugar limit handout, which is great. All right. So jumping in to nuts, seeds, peanuts, and other nut butters. Previously, nuts and seeds could only count as half of a component at lunch and supper, but it's now allowed as a full component for meat or meat alternate at all of the meals. Just also be aware, nut butters and peanut butters are a possible choking hazard for under 3. And 2 tablespoons is equal to 1 ounce meat equivalent. Something also to note with nut butters, 2 tablespoons is quite a lot of peanut butter. So if you need to serve, 1.5 ounces of meat, maybe serving a cheese stick on the side, or serving it with, I don't know, something else to make up to the full serving size of meat may be necessary, just due to the quantity of it that is needed to meet those larger portion sizes for the older kids. All right, so non-creditable cheese or yogurt products. So cheese products such as the American sliced cheese that are in the plastic, so Kraft singles is an example, are not creditable. Same with Velveeta, any kind of canned cheese sauce or mix. Again, any kind of yogurt beverages, frozen yogurt. I believe Natalie mentioned cream cheese earlier, and because that is considered a condiment. Same with sour cream, and then any kind of puddings would not count as your meat alternate. All right, and going into tofu, it is creditable for all participants. Again, homemade tofu is not creditable just due to safety concerns. Tofu is sold in stores is creditable, and ingredients should be listed as whole soybeans, water, and 1 or more food grade coagulants, such as salt or acid. Soft or silken tofu that is incorporated into drinks like a smoothie is not creditable towards your meat component. Tofu substitute products are not considered processed meat and can be served several times a week. All right, and here are the serving sizes for tofu. So 1/4 a cup or 2.2 ounces equal to 1 ounce equivalents. 1/4 of a cup and 2 tablespoons or 3.3 ounces is equal to 1.5 ounces of meat equivalents. And then 4.4 ounces or 1/2 a cup is equal to 2 ounce equivalents for meat. And again, all of this information can be found in that crediting handbook, which is a really great resource just to be able to better understand kind of what the serving sizes are for these different types of products. All right, jumping into processed meats. So processed meats contain extenders or binders, and they're included on those ingredient lists. Some examples include meat or poultry byproducts, cereals, flours, starches, dried milk, whey, or dried eggs. Those are common binders that we see. And then if a product is not 100% meat, you must have a child nutrition label or a CN label or a manufacturer specification document to be able to serve the product. So you must have that on file. And I'll go into CN labels, I believe, on the next slide. Oh, just kidding. In a few slides. Sorry. I don't have my other one pulled up. What are considered processed meats? Anything that's frozen or breaded, such as chicken nuggets, chicken patties, pork patties, basically any of those frozen meat products that are breaded, anything that you can think of, those would be considered processed meats. Other things that we commonly see are meatballs. Those are the frozen or commercially prepared meatballs. They commonly have those binders in them. Homemade meatballs are totally fine. But if you're purchasing it frozen, then that would be considered processed. Other things such as sausages, Vienna sausages, bratwurst, pepperoni, bologna, and salami are all examples of processed meat. All right, now diving into what a child nutrition label is. So a CN label, or the Child Nutrition Labeling Program, allows manufacturers to disclose a product's contributions to the meal pattern. So the CN label will contain it has like a specific logo. It'll include the meal pattern contribution statement. It'll have a 6-digit product identification number. It'll be authorized by the USDA, and it'll have a month and year of approval. And on the next slide, this is what those CN labels look like. So this is for a chicken or drumstick. I would say that these are challenging to find with store-bought products. Not a lot of them come with the CN label listed on the product like this. However, there are like online, some of the manufacturers will have the CN label listed online that you can find and keep on file. So if the product does not have the CN label on the packaging, you might be able to find that label online or ask your nutrition consultant, because we have a good resource for a bunch of different products that we see. So as I mentioned, so CN labels is used to determine the quantity of food to prepare and serve to each participant to meet the meal pattern. You must obtain the information from the manufacturer if the CN label is not available, and institutions must keep all CN labels for any process or convenience food on file. And that's something we do ask for at your reviews. We ask to see the CN labels for the products. If the institution contracts with a food service vendor, the vendor must also provide this documentation. So a CN label does not make the component or does not make the meal creditable. The CN label serving size must be matched to the, oh my gosh, I'm having a hard time speaking today. So sorry. The CN label serving size must be matched to the required serving size. So, and also you need to make sure that these serving sizes are reasonable for the children that you're serving. So if the CN label says that you need to serve 9 fish sticks to meet the serving size requirements, that might not be feasible to eat 9 fish sticks as a 3-year-old. So if that's the case, and you can only serve, let's say, 3 fish sticks, you would need to serve something else to meet the full meat or meat alternate requirement, which is why those CN labels are so important. So you know how much to serve to be able to meet those minimums. All right, so here is an activity, and I'll give you guys some time.
Amy,
Oh,
excuse
yeah.
me, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Listen, can we go back to that previous slide?
Yes.
So you're saying that basically if it has a CN label, that doesn't necessarily mean it's creditable. So when you're looking at the CN label, so in other words, you can't take that for face value. You have to go back and look at all the ingredients. So even if it has a CN label, don't trust that?
Yeah, so the CN label is really just used for your serving sizes. So, this kind of statement also kind of refers to processed meats can only be served 2 times per, or oh my gosh, is it 1 time per week? Yeah, 1 time per week. So you can't serve like chicken nuggets just because it has a CN label 3 times a week. And so that's kind of what this is saying. But also making sure that if it's a chicken nugget and it does have grains, making sure that it's enriched so that it is creditable, to be able to use that as the grain component of the meal. All right, so going back to the CN label activity, so this is a CN label for chicken nuggets, and it says that there are 4 fully cooked breaded chicken breast patty nuggets with rib meat provides 1.5 ounce equivalents for meat and 0.75 serving for bread alternate, according to our meal pattern. So if we're looking at just the meat or meat alternate component, we know that you need to have 1 ounce for 1 to 2-year-olds, 1.5 ounces for 3 to 5-year-olds, and 2 ounces for 6 to 12-year-olds. So you guys can pull out, I don't know, your phones or your calculators to figure this out. And I'll give you guys a couple minutes before we go to the next slide with the answer. So what I'm asking is, how many chicken nuggets do you need to serve for each one of these age groups to meet the serving size requirement? So it does require some. All right, I think we can go to the next slide. So here is kind of the math for each one of those age groups. So you can see that four fully cooked chicken nuggets will get you 1.5 ounces of meat. So for your 1 to 2 year olds, you can serve 4 chicken nuggets to meet the ounce requirement for that age group. For 3 to 5 year olds, because you need 1.5 ounces, you would need to add one additional chicken nugget to be able to meet that meal component. And kind of how that math is done, 4 chicken nuggets is equal to 1.5 ounces. So you would divide 1.5 by 4, and then you find each nugget is 0.31 ounce equivalents of meat. So you would use that to be able to do the math to figure out how much needs to be served for each age group. And then for those 6 to 11 year olds or 6 to 12 year olds, 2 ounces divided by that 3.125 is equal to 6.4. So you would round up to 7 chicken nuggets. Any questions on kind of why that is or how to do that math or anything regarded to CN labels?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If it comes out to like 3.1, do you always round up?
Yeah, because
Okay.
you want to be able to make sure that the full component is served, even if a little extra is served.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions on CN labels? Yeah, and as I mentioned, CN labels can be really challenging to find, especially for centers that are purchasing the food from the grocery store. So if you ever have a product that you're like, I really want to serve this, can you help me find it? Just ask your nutrition consultants and we can kind of dig into it, or email manufacturers for you to see if we can get a product formulation statement or a CN label for the product that you're requesting. All right. So what is not, these are not considered processed meats. So any kind of fresh meat or fish, so beef, poultry, pork, fish, any of those are fine to serve without a CN label. Frozen meat or fish without breading. So you can buy like I don't know, Costco has chicken strips that are not breaded. Those are totally fine to serve, even though they're frozen without a CN label. Any kind of cured pork or ham or Canadian bacon is fine. Deli meats are not considered processed, and canned tuna, chicken, or salmon. All right.
Amy,
Yes.
why is it that deli meats aren't considered? Because I mean, when I see the phrase deli meat, I think of like pastrami, salami, you know.
Yeah, so I don't know if Natalie can go back to what is considered a processed meat. So some of those, I don't know what that was on. Some of those are. So your like pepperonis, bolognas, and salamis are considered processed meats because those are the ones that typically have the binders in it. But your like turkey or ham or I don't know, like roast beef, I think that's a deli meat, are typically just 100% that product. So those would not be considered processed meats. All right. So deep fat frying. So this is when you're cooking by submerging the food in hot oil or another fat This is prohibited on site or from a satellite or central kitchen. Pre-fried, flash fried, or par fried purchased foods are okay. So those are those like breaded products that maybe, fried somewhere else and then you're buying them frozen. Those are okay. You just can't deep fat fry on site. And then Colorado Healthier Meals Initiative policy limits processed meats to no more than one time per week. So that means you couldn't do a fish stick on Monday and chicken nuggets on Friday. That would be considered a processed or two processed meats in one. Allowable methods of cooking can include sauteing, pan frying, stir frying, baking, broiling, searing, and another kind of example would be like air fryers are totally fine as well, because they're not considered fat frying or deep fat frying. All right, any questions on meat or processed meats or meat alternates before I dive into milk? All right, cool. Well, I will jump into milk then, or fluid milk. Natalie, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so here are portion sizes based on the ages for fluid milk. So for 1 to 2 year olds at breakfast, it's a half a cup at breakfast, lunch, and supper. For 3 to 5 year olds, it's 3/4 of a cup at breakfast and lunch, and then only a half a cup at snack. For 6 to 12 year olds or 13 to 18 year olds, that's for those at risk after school program that has the older kids. It's 1 cup for breakfast, lunch, and snack. And adults, it's the same 1 cup at all of the meals. All right, so the fluid milk requirements, whole or 1% or fat-free milk are the required milks for the different age groups, and I'll go into like which age groups require the different fat contents later. Lactose-free or reduced lactose are also creditable with us. You don't need a special diet or a milk substitution form for lactose-free milk. Acidified milk, cultured milk, or cultured buttermilk are also fine, as well as goat's milk. And then I mentioned that it must meet the fat content and flavoring requirements per the age groups. Milk cups must be large enough for the entire portion to be poured on the first pour. So if, for example, for 1 to 2 year olds, you have a 4-ounce cup, which is a half a cup, that would not work because you would need to fill that cup up all the way to the brim to be able to serve the full portion. So you would want to use like a 6-ounce cup to fit the 4-ounce portion size in it. Breast milk is allowed at any age in the proper serving size. So if you have a 1-year-old that's still receiving breast milk, that's okay, and that is creditable. A minimum portion of breast milk cannot be offered. If a minimum portion of breast milk cannot be offered, it must be supplemented with another fluid milk. All right, so here are the different fat and flavoring requirements for fluid milk. So birth through 11 months or until the first birthday, breast milk and fortified infant formula is required for those little babies. For 12 months to 23 months, so first birthday to second birthday, unflavored whole milk is the requirement. Anyone over the age of from 2 to 5, unflavored fat-free, so skim milk or 1% milk. And then for 6 to 12 year olds or 13 through 18 year olds and adults, unflavored or flavored fat-free milk or unflavored or flavored low-fat milk. So once they're over 6, they can receive flavored milk, but under 6, they may not receive any type of flavored milk. All right, so as I mentioned, it's only allowed for over 6-year-olds for flavored milk. It must be fat-free or 1%. And you can make this with syrups, powders, or pre-purchased flavored milks. All right. And so again, these requirements were put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics. So 1-year-olds should be receiving whole milk, which is 50% of the calories from fat. And then 2 years and older, you would need to switch from whole milk to 1% or skim milk to reduce the fat content. All right. So we understand that sometimes transitioning from whole milk to low fat or fat-free milk can be challenging for some children. So there is kind of a 1 month transition period to help with this change. So from 24 months to 25 months, children can be served whole milk, 2% milk, or low fat or fat-free milk. This is the only time that 2% milk is ever creditable. So if you purchase 2% milk, just know that it's not creditable and will not be able to be counted. So if you are only purchasing 2% milk, those meals would not be creditable. Unless for some reason you whole center was 24 months to 25 months. So just know that this is the only time that we should see 2% milk on your receipts. But once a child turns 25 months, you must offer them low fat or fat-free milk, or you would need a medical statement saying they need to receive in a different fat content milk. Any questions on that? All right, I think we can jump to the next slide. So this, and Ari just put this resource in the chat. So this just goes over our serving milk requirements in CACFP. For our adult care centers, yogurt can be served in place of milk up to 1 time per day. And serving milk at a supper is optional, but that's only for our adult participants. And then this also just kind of goes into what the requirements are for flavored milk as well for over 6-year-olds.
I have a question.
Yeah.
With the lactose-free milk, we have some of our adults that drink that. Do we need to track how many lactose-free we're serving each day so that when you come in for audit and we're doing the milk calculation worksheet, the lactose-free should be separate from the regular milk? Should we have 2 different milk worksheets?
Nope, you can just use all one. So when I look at your receipts for milk quantity, I will include the lactose milk that you're purchasing in the total count of how much milk you need to buy.
Okay.
So that would all kind of go into one lump group together.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we don't need, I think you mentioned earlier, we were waiting for today. If we're serving lactose-free milk, we don't need to have a milk substitute form. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Because really the only thing that's different about that milk is the lactose is removed, but it has the same nutrient content as regular cow's milk. So you don't need any kind of special forms to be able to serve the lactose-free.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Right. Any other questions on milks? There's a couple more slides, so I might cover it. So these are non-creditable fluid milks. So as I mentioned, the 2% milk, rice milk, powdered milks, almond or other nut milks are not creditable. Coconut milk, oat milks, evaporated milk, sweetened or condensed milk, eggnog, half and half, non-dairy creamers, and water would all not count towards your fluid milk components. And I know there's probably some questions on like those coconut and almond milks, which I will go into in a second. All right, other non-creditable milk products. So milk is not creditable when it's an ingredient of another food. So that's pudding, ice cream, commercially prepared frozen yogurts, creams and soups, or cream soups, sauces, dips, or sour cream. So just because they have milk in them does not make them a fluid milk, part of that fluid milk component. All right, so water may not be offered in lieu of milk during breakfast, lunch, or supper. Water is not a creditable component, but it is a great option to serve with those other 2 creditable components at snack time. Drinking water must be available throughout the day for kids and adults, I think, younger children or nonverbal participants who are unable to ask for water themselves, they must be offered. And ask often if they would like to drink water, because it is an important component, or it is an important thing to offer, but not a component per se for CACFP, if that makes sense. All right, so diving into our milk substitute request forms and our special diet forms, there is, I believe, Ari's going to put it in the chat, a form that kind of goes over how to choose the right form for the which situation. but I'll go into each one and kind of explain both in a little bit more detail. Starting with the milk substitute form, participants or guardians may request in writing a non-dairy substitute or a milk substitute with using the milk substitute request form. Non-dairy substitute must meet the nutrition standards for milk, which are on this slide on the right side. So recently, just the unit of measurements changed for vitamin A and vitamin D. So there is an updated form on our website, and I believe Ari just put that in the chat. And then participants or guardians may supply this alternative. And then the center also has the option to supply. So this form is really used for items such as like soy milk. Soy milk, there are a few out there that meet the same nutrient requirements as cow's milk. So it has to meet all of these requirements for calcium, protein, vitamin A, vitamin D. Those all have to be met for it to be able to use this milk substitute request form. I've never seen an oat milk or an almond milk that meets these same nutrient requirements. So if you have a parent that's requesting an almond milk or an oat milk, and it does not meet these nutrient requirements, those would not be creditable, and you could not claim that child unless you have a special diet statement on file that's indicating these are the substitutions that need to be made by a medical professional, which I'll go into in a second. But this is what that milk substitute form looks like. So the parents would fill this out. It does not need to be signed by a medical professional. They would fill out that top portion, so the participant's name, the age of the participant, and then the substitute that's being requested. And then and then they would also fill out if they choose to provide the substitute, or if they want the center to provide it. And then they would sign and date the bottom. And then you, as the providers, would then look at the substitute that they're requesting. So you would need to know the brand and the type that's being served. And then you would determine if that substitute meets those nutrient requirements for and matches what the nutrient requirements are for cow's milk. So if you saw an almond milk, you would go through their nutrition label. Does it meet these standards? You would circle, yes, it's creditable. No, it's not creditable. And then if it's not creditable, you would either need to speak with the parent about a potential other option that would be creditable, or you would need to just not claim that child for meals served. Any questions on the milk substitute form before I dive into the special diet statement? All right, so jumping into the special diet statement, Natalie, if you can go to the next slide, thank you. So Ari just put this one in the chat as well. Basically, special diet statements are used if an exception to the meal pattern may be necessary for medical issues. You would use this form basically if the substitute is not creditable within our meal pattern. You would also need, the form needs to include the patient or the participant's disability and an explanation of how the disability restricts their diet, the major life activities affected by the disability, and the foods to omit and the substituted foods. So, for example, if you have a kiddo that's allergic to dairy, the foods to omit would be dairy, and the substitutions would be whatever substitutions that doctor deems necessary. So if it is almond milk or oat milk or something like that as the substitution, that's what needs to be honored. These need to be signed by a medical professional, licensed physicians, advanced practice nurses, dentists, physician assistants, and registered dietitians. Registered dietitians is new, so make sure that you have the new special diet statement. If you're just like copying an old form, it has been updated to include that registered dietitians are allowed to sign this form. All right, so this is what the form looks like. And again, it has those foods to omit and then suggested substitutions. If you get a form that says omit milk, let's say, but no suggested substitutions, you would need to send this back home with the parent to get those substitutions written into that portion, because we need to know what that substitution is so that we know that you're meeting those requirements on the form. Okay.
I do have a fast question on that.
Yeah.
We did have a physician write in water or juice. Is Since they did write that in, is that acceptable for credibility, or do we need to tell
Yeah.
them that's not okay?
Yep, that's totally fine. So these forms are honored because they're for medical purpose.
Okay.
So if the food was milk that's being omitted and water or juice was the substitution, then that is fine and we would honor that
Okay.
substitution.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question as well. On it has like the mechanical soft or Purate or whatever. Do we have to have one of these forms if we have a physician's order that's signed by the physician stating that they need to have their food in this other form rather than regular?
Yeah, so I believe you sent me an email and I was going to email you back. I'm sorry, I've been on
Oh, okay.
vacation.
That's
Um,
okay.
so it is for our adult daycare centers, we understand that they have medical forms. So as long as all of this information is provided in a different form that is allowed, you would just need to make sure that all of this information is on whatever form you're using to
Okay.
meet those same standards. So if you want to send it to me, I can look at it
Okay.
and we can chat more about it.
All right, thank
Yep.
you.
And I just saw in the chat vanilla lactose free milk. So vanilla milk would be considered a flavored milk, and would only be allowed if the participant is over the age of 6. But lactose milk, unflavored, is creditable at any time for anyone under the age of 6 or over in that case. All right. So this worksheet is, I believe, available on our website, but Ari just put it into the chat as well. This is a really good way to calculate how much milk you need. We do these calculations when we're on site to make sure that you're purchasing enough milk to meet all of the or to serve the minimum serving sizes at breakfast, lunch, and if you have any snacks that you serve milk at. Again, milk is not required at snack time. But if you do serve milk at snack time, we do calculate that into kind of how much milk you should be buying. So you could use your previous claim when you're entering this in to really get a better understanding of like how much milk I actually need to be buying. And I believe when you use this link, you need to download the form to be able to edit it. And you would put in how many breakfasts a month you serve to each one of these age groups because they all require a different serving size amount. A really kind of good rule of thumb, if you have mostly 3 to 5-year-olds, and you have a little bit less 1 to 2-year-olds, you could just put in the total meals served to 3 to 5-year-olds, and that would give you a really good estimate of where you should be at. But if you want to kind of calculate it and take out the 1 to 2-year-olds and put those in individually, you can do that as well. And then if you do snacks, only do it for the snacks that you have milk. So you wouldn't want to put your entire snack claim into that section because you would be way overbuying milk. So only include the snacks that have milk served.
I have another second question. I'm sorry. The health department came in and requested us to throw away any of our milks that were open past 7 days. So we had to throw away all of our soy milk and lactose-free milks because we only had like one child at the center. Is that correct? Because the expiration date on the soy milk was like the end of the year.
Yeah, so I believe on soy milk, at least the soy milks I've purchased in the past have like really small writing, like use within 7 to 10 days of opening.
Okay.
So yes, that I would follow what your health department says and only use and only keep them open for 7 days. One suggestion for like your soy milks, if you have a small number of kids that receive it, you can buy those smaller shelf stable milks. That way you're not having to throw away extra milk. So instead of buying like the half gallon, you can buy
Okay.
those smaller portions to help kind of reduce that waste and need to buy more.
Okay, I will Thank you. I'll do a cost analysis and see.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, Emily. I just helped another center that had a very similar question, and this is a suggestion that I gave them was they could also freeze the milk, and then just label it, frozen on this date, and then when you like thaw it to reserve it, as long as that is within the 7 days, you could do that too, kind of like make your own smaller containers, just pull out however much you would need for a week at a time. So if that's helpful too.
Sorry, thank you. I couldn't get to my unmute button. Okay, yeah. Thank you for that suggestion. I will look in
Yeah.
and see what some of our options are. I know that our Shamrock dairy technically does carry 7-ounce soy milks and I think lactose-free milk, so that
Okay.
might be cheaper in the long run. Okay. Thank you guys.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, always reach out. We're happy to help you, no problem solve those things. But yeah, if the health inspectors tell you something, definitely listen to them.
Yes, I saw it. I was just like, oh my gosh, the cost though.
Yeah, I
Okay, thank you
know.
so much.
Yeah, of course.
And definitely, Emily, make sure that if you're switching soy products, that those soy products meet the nutrient requirements for the milk substitution, because not all soy products are the same. So not every
Yeah,
soy product meets those.
any our standard best practice is anybody not on normal dairy milk has to have a physician sign off for whatever reason. So, but I do believe we try to get the best ratio for the soy milks, but we do have the substitution form written in by a physician, so or the dietitian, or yeah, now that that's new, but yes.
Great. That's
Thank you.
And then one more thing to kind of note on this milk worksheet. As I mentioned, we do look at milk quantities at our compliance reviews. And if we find that you are not purchasing enough milk, it does have a financial implication. So make sure you're looking at how much milk you're purchasing and make sure that you're purchasing enough to serve those minimum requirements to each age group, because we don't want to have to take back money for that. All right. So documentation of milk. It is required that you have the fat content of the milk and if the milk is flavored on the menus. So if you utilize our menu kind of template that we have a statement at the bottom that says all milk served to children 2 years and older is unflavored fat-free milk, and children 1 year of age are served unflavored whole milk. So you can kind of take that statement and add it to your menus. Or if you have all kids who are over the age of 2 or adults, you can say, like in each day, let's say for breakfast and lunch, you could say fat-free, unflavored milk, like on the actual menu. So it just needs to be documented somewhere, either in a statement like that at the bottom of the menu or within the actual menu.
Is 1% no longer allowed for over the age of 2?
No, it is. So fat-free or 1%. I believe our statement says 1%. And maybe it's just not included on this one, but
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
it is. Yeah, that's totally fine. 1% or fat-free.
Okay, great. I was like, oh no. Okay, great.
All right. And so we, as the state agency, will assume all milk served during this period is what is listed on the footer. Unless, for example, I'm looking at your menus and I see you're only buying 2% milk, then I would not be able to assume that all milk is served meeting those requirements. Right. So parents and guardians are allowed to provide up to one meal component, and you can still claim that meal. And this is for non-disability or special needs. So if parents were like, we just picked these strawberries from our garden, we want her to eat the strawberries at lunchtime, that's totally fine. They can have that as their one parent-provided meal option, and you can still claim it. But if mom or dad brings in an entire packed lunch, that would not be allowed to be claimed because the parents are bringing in more than one meal component. We do recommend that documenting this. It is recommended. And that's if, like, for example, a parent is bringing in, let's say, a soy milk or like a Ripple pea protein milk, making sure that that's included kind of in your milk counts is really important, because if parents are bringing in, if you have like 4 different kids and their parents are bringing in their milk for them, that could potentially throw off our milk calculations. So documenting that the parents are bringing in that milk is really important for us, so that we know to kind of disregard that or take that into consideration when we're doing our calculation. All right. And I can answer this question really quickly that's in the chat. So what about gluten-free kids? So that is a special diet. So a special diet statement is required if the child is not getting a meal component. So if you can provide a gluten-free option as a bread, then that child is still getting that grain component. But if they're like no grains at all, nothing that falls into that category, they can't have anything, then you would need a special diet statement stating that they cannot receive the grain component of the meal. But if you're able to provide, a gluten-free option for them, I would probably still have a special diet statement on file, just because then a physician you have that documented, but not. It's only required if they really can't get a meal component.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
We have 2 kids who specifically one very strict with the gluten-free, and they just like, if it's a day where we have pasta or sandwiches, they try to bring in like a sandwich but just with gluten-free bread, or they if we have or they'll give us frozen bread to keep here or whatever. So they're providing that for us, but maybe we'll just do the special diet statements just to be safe.
Yeah, I would say having more documentation, the better, just to have it. And that way, like if they don't bring in a gluten-free bread for you to use, or you don't have any on hand, and so they're then not going to get the bread related to the sandwich, then you would have something on file saying, okay, they didn't get the grain component that day, and it's okay because it's a part of their special diet. Any other questions? And I guess I should also mention kind of with the centers are required to make reasonable modifications related to special diet statements. So if you have someone that's gluten-free, you are required by our civil rights requirements to provide meal components if requested by the parent. So if the parent wanted you to be able to provide a gluten-free option, that is a reasonable modification that would need to be made. Parents are welcome to bring those components in, but if they request that you provide the gluten-free bread, it is a reasonable modification. If, for example, they want you to buy the bread that's $15 instead of the bread that's like $7, let's say, or $5, then obviously that would not be reasonable. There's a cheaper option that you guys can provide. So explaining that to the parents is okay. But yeah, so as long as it's reasonable, and if you have any questions or have any parents that request that you provide those items, reaching out to your nutrition consultant is kind of the best scenario for that as well.
Thank you so much.
Right. Any other questions on kind of special diet statements, milk, meat, before I hand it over? All right. I believe it is Kelly next, maybe? Yeah.
Thank you, Amy. So I'm going to be covering fruits and vegetables and the requirements for those. So vegetables can be served as either fresh, frozen, or canned. We do recommend serving fresh or frozen over canned, just due to the amount of sodium that is often found in our canned vegetables. And if you do buy canned, trying to find the low sodium versions is also best practice. And if you are serving canned items, or frozen, it is drained vegetables is the serving size. So make sure that if you're using those, that you're making sure to drain them before you serve a portion out. And also if you're using canned, to kind of rinse them just to get off some of the excess water that has the sodium in it. Beans also can count as a vegetable when it is not being counted as a meat or meat alternate. So an example of when beans could not be counted as both is, say you have a bean burrito and you're putting twice the amount of beans into that burrito. That cannot be counted as a meat alternate and a vegetable. And home canned products are not creditable due to health and safety reasons. That's for vegetables and fruits. Just to reiterate, potatoes are a vegetable. They're not considered a grain for CACFP. They are considered a starchy vegetable. So if you're serving, say you're going to have, roast beef, gravy, mashed potatoes, and then green beans, and then your fruit, and then your milk, you do still have to add a roll to that meal. I know somehow we've all kind of got it in our brains that potatoes are carbs, carbs are grains, and so sometimes we forget that. This is something that has come into over the last year. For tribal communities and Hawaii, they are allowed to substitute vegetables for grains. So that includes, here in our state, our American Indian tribes. So a half a cup of credible vegetables or 1 cup of raw leaf greens is equivalent to a 1 ounce grain. And vegetables substituting as grains can be used to meet the whole grain rich requirement as well. And there's no limit to the number of times that you can substitute a vegetable for a grain per week. These flexibilities also extend to programs in American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Operators do not have to submit a request for approval for this flexibility. However, you do have to maintain documentation that demonstrates your eligibility as a tribal community. So that could be aggregate data, certifying statements, or school or census data. So fruits can be served either as fresh, frozen, canned, or dried. Again, best practice is to start with your fresh and your frozen before moving to your canned and dried fruits. Canned and dried fruits tend to have a higher sugar content than fresh or frozen. Dried fruits can also be served because they, again, are dried and more concentrated. A 1/4 cup of a dried fruit would be credited as a half a cup of fruit. And it's, important to note that dried fruits and small fruits can be choking hazards for children under the age of 4. So just make sure that if you are serving, say, something like grapes to those children, that you are cutting them in half or quarters, just to make sure that they don't have the possibility of choking on those. Fruit chips, such as bananas or other fruits, commercially fried fruit chips, are not creditable. These products are high in salt and in sugar, very low in nutrients. So we do not allow those as creditable fruits. So if you have, say, if you're making your own trail mix, which, that's something that I've seen, just make sure that you have other creditable components in that trail mix to meet the requirements for, say, either the grains, or if you're doing nuts for the meat alternate, if you are adding these fried fruit chips to those trail mixes. Juices are allowed for children over the age of 1 and adults. They do have to be a 100% fruit or vegetable juice or blend. The blends cannot credit fruit and vegetables in the same meal. The credit is based on the first fruit or vegetable that's listed in the ingredients, and no more than 2 times per week can juice be served. So, okay. So the CACFP meal pattern requires that fruits and vegetables reflect the minimum portion sizes for the various forms of produce. So half a cup of a dried, or sorry, a quarter cup of dried fruit would credit as half a cup of fruit. 1 cup of leafy greens, such as your salads, will credit as half a cup of vegetables. Lettuce garnishes are not credited as components. Pureed vegetables and fruits, sorry, can contribute to the meal pattern, but the dish must provide 1/2 cup of recognizable form of fruit and vegetable. And so, a popular recipe in a childcare setting is like butternut squash, macaroni, and cheese. So if you do decide to serve this dish, you would need to have at least 1/8 cup of recognizable form of butternut squash, in addition to the pureed squash in the dish. The reason for this is so that children can easily recognize and identify the foods they're consuming, and we're not tricking them into eating their vegetables. Because I don't know about you, but if I was little and I was eating something really yummy and mom's like, oh yeah, I pureed broccoli into it and I didn't like broccoli, I would be a little upset. So we want our children to recognize these foods as they are and get used to the flavors and, be able to go home and be like, Mom, can we have butternut squash next week? So, oh, next slide. So fruit and vegetable combinations. So at breakfast, you can serve fruit, a vegetable, or a combination of the two. Lunch and supper, you have to serve one, or you can serve 1 fruit and 1 vegetable. Also allowable is 2 vegetables. However, you are not allowed to serve a fruit, 2 fruits, 2 different fruits, I should say, with lunch and supper. Snack, you may serve fruit, vegetables, or both. Allowable is 1 fruit and 1 vegetable. What is not allowed for snack is 2 different types of fruits or 2 different types of vegetables. We got an activity, and Natalie, were we going to do a survey on this one or just put it into the chat box?
I'm gonna do a poll that is
Okay.
gonna ask which meal so we're gonna do this one day at a time.
Yeah.
The poll, everyone can select the meal on that day, and then if you want to drop in the chat box specifically the error. So let me give me just a second, I'll pull that right up here.
So Monday, we're going to take a look at breakfast, as well as we're going to take a look at lunch and at snack. So based on the rules, meal pattern rules for fruits and vegetables, which meal has the error? And if you know which meal and what the error is, you're welcome to put that into the chat box as well. Okay. Natalie, do we have most people?
Almost half. I'll give it a couple more seconds here.
Okay.
All right, we'll go ahead and end this and share. There we go.
So breakfast is correct. Breakfast is missing its fruit or vegetable. And this is also, just for awareness, a common error that we do see on some of our menus. So kind of something to make sure that you're keeping track of. All right. So for Tuesday, can you identify which meal has the error? And if you know what the error is, you can put it in the chat box as well. Alrighty, and that is correct. There is an error at lunch. So the error that occurred here is that there were 2 servings of vegetables, which is allowable for lunch. However, both vegetables were the same. So in this situation, you would want to serve, instead of roasted carrots and fresh carrots, you would serve, carrots and peas. Or, this is one of those situations where you could have been like, I'm going to have mashed potatoes and fresh carrots. So you can serve 2 vegetables in a lunch, but they do have to be different types of vegetables. Alrighty. So next we're on to Wednesday. And this one is a little tricky. So
That's what we like to do.
and the little tricky ones that we like to put in there are also the ones that we see the most errors on. So our goal is not to trick you, but to help you identify where you may have an error.
All right, there's still some answers coming in, so I'm gonna give the poll a couple more seconds here. Okay.
Okay. So yeah, this one I did kind of expect to be a little across the board. So the actual error is going to be in breakfast where it says fruit. Your menus do need to specify what type of fruit and what type of vegetable is being served. So I understand if you have like a food service vendor that you're using and they don't really let you know what the fruit is until the day of. That's one of those things where you would have to write it in on the menu so the parents know. However, if you know what your fruit is, then you need to make sure that it is specified on the menu and available for all to see. So yeah, that one is a common error we see on some of our menus. All right, what about Thursday?
All right, gonna give it a couple more seconds here. We've got almost half of people who have answered. This is another kind of tricky one. Okay, there we go.
So 10% of you got it right. Well, no, I take that back. It's more like 51. It could be either or. So the error in this one is that there were 2 processed meats served in one day. So your breakfast sausage is considered a processed meat as well as your chicken nuggets. So you're only allowed to serve those once a day. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're creating, or not once a day, sorry, once a week. Keep that in mind when you're creating your menus and you want to add a breakfast sausage and then you want to have chicken nuggets or fish sticks or something like that. Just keeping count of where your processed meats are in your menu. All right, and so the last one on Friday, this one's not so tricky. Okay, correct. Yes, so snack has two fruits. And so again, having two of the same component is not allowed in any of the snack meals. So you just want to make sure that you have two different components at snack time. And so, of course, we want to reiterate that you're always welcome to send us your menus to be reviewed. I like getting the menus to look at because then I can ensure that we're both learning, and just to reach out to your nutrition consultant if you ever have any questions about your menus. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Natalie.
Awesome, Kelly. Thank you. Yep, so I just put the answers up on the slide there. I'll leave that up for a moment, and then we're actually just about done. I always like to book these longer than I think we need, because everybody gets excited if you're done early, but nobody wants to be your friend if your trainings go long. So we'll be wrapping up here in a few minutes. I'm just gonna kind of walk you guys through some resources. So I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen so that I can get those pulled up properly. Okay. Mm. Okay, Kelly, I see your face. Can you give me a thumbs up if you guys can see my screen again? Fabulous. Okay. Alrighty, so I'm going to walk you guys through our website a little bit. It's been going through a lot of changes lately, and sometimes things are a little bit trickier than normal to find. So I'm going to kind of walk you guys through the website. So, oh yes, thank you, Ari. So anyone who joined us on Tuesday and doesn't want to stick around, because this kind of final portion is the same as we did on Tuesday, um the website and then the download forms in CNP. So you guys can hop off if you'd like. Ari shared the pre or the post test and evaluation links, which I will also send out in an email. Tomorrow, everyone will get their certificates from Tuesday and today, the recordings for both days, the PowerPoints for both days, all of the links we shared, and our contact information if you have any additional questions. So anyway, farewell to anyone who's gonna hop off. But everyone is more than welcome to stay. And the consultants can stick around for some additional question and answer at the end as well. Okay, all right, back to the website. So as I mentioned at the very beginning today, our website or our team has gone through a renaming and rebrand. So our website reflects that now. We do have this really nice intro video. It's only about a minute long. And it's just kind of a great tool to share with families that kind of teaches them about what the Colorado Food Program is. Also on the main page of the website is a direct link that will take you to the Colorado Nutrition Portal, which is where you will enter your claims. Or yes, I have everyone's email. Yep. That's how you enter your claims or update your application. And then there is also a link here that takes you to all of the due dates for your claims. On the right side, we're going to walk through some of these little tabs. The first one is our program contact information. So if you don't have our main email or phone number, it is always listed here on the website that you can access. The next tab we're going to go through, you just have to scroll down just a little bit. It's the training tab. So this calendar shows you all of our upcoming training opportunities. So as you can see here, this is the training that we're on right now, our virtual meal pattern training. And the registration link is here. You can scroll through the months at the top and look at what we have upcoming. So in a couple weeks, we are going to have a virtual training specifically about infants, and you may register for that here. In March, we are going to have a training virtually specific for sponsors of centers. Again, registration is available there. And then starting end of March, we are going to do in-person trainings. We have lots of exciting ones scheduled all around the state. And fingers crossed, the weather cooperates for us. It's always tricky scheduling those so far in advance. But in March, there is going to be one in Denver. April, we are going to be traveling to Pueblo and Greeley. All of the registration links are available for all of these, by the way. In May, we are going to be in Durango. In June, we are going to be back in Denver. We are giving ourselves the month off of July for the first time, as far as anybody can remember. So we are excited about that. And then August, we don't have the date finalized yet, but we will be in Grand Junction in August. And then I don't have the September date on here either, but we'll have one in Denver in September. I'm also going to walk you through this link here. This is all of our training information that you'll need for the year. So if you are up for a review this year and you didn't attend or watch the virtual training we did on getting ready for a review, that link is available here. You can also look at our checklist for a review here. These are all of our upcoming virtual sessions. Same information that I just walked through on the calendar. This is just kind of a one-stop shop for everything. This is all the information for our upcoming in-person trainings. It has all of the addresses, dates, times, locations. This section is our previously recorded Zoom training. So in previous years, we did the training that we offered this week, the Tuesday, Thursday. We did that same information over 5 different Zoom sessions and recorded those. We wanted to kind of consolidate it a little bit, so that's why we did 2 longer trainings this time. But if you kind of want more short and sweet type trainings, those are only about an hour, hour and a half long each. If you are an adult daycare center, we have a training recorded specifically about adult daycares available here. This is the information on the self-paced training modules. So if you have new staff, that's really helpful because they can do it at their own pace. So it's all of the same information we provided this week, but it's broken into the 5 sections, and it's where they can just click through on their own. And the meal pattern one is available in Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and English. These are some additional training videos. These currently do not provide a certificate. However, they're on very specific topics. So they're really helpful for staff that have duties in those areas. So the first one is about an hour and a half, and it's all about income eligibility forms and the most common errors that we see and how they could potentially financially impact your institution. So that one's really helpful. This is the grain ounce equivalence training I mentioned earlier. This is an infant training from a couple of years ago, and then a fiscal requirements training is here as well. Most of you probably have an account on the PDIS, which is the Colorado Shines Professional Development Information Center. Our self-paced modules are also accessible on there. And then there is an intro to CACFP program available on PDIS in English and Spanish. We have some new training videos we're going to be releasing this year in March. There's going to be 4 of them. They're about 10 minutes each, and they focus on these 4 different specific parts of program requirements. So one is about infant meals, one is about whole grains, one is about procurement, and one is about special diets and milk substitutes. And then finally at the bottom here is a bunch of links. It's most, but not all of the links that we shared today. So that is all of this information in this lovely PDF. Again, that is available right here on our website in the training section. Next, I'm going to walk you all through the materials and forms tab. So this is most of the record keeping requirements that you all will need and broken down by program type. So adults, child care centers, or family child care homes. This is all of the income eligibility form information for all of those in all the available languages. This is the special diet statement forms and milk substitute forms. All of these are in English and Spanish. We also have a special diet. It does not look like that's a link though. Okay. There is a special diet statement form for adult daycare participants. It looks like it's not linked on the website, so I will work on getting that fixed. If you're up for a review, here is some information on how to access that information. Site visit forms for sponsors of centers. Menu templates. So we have a ton of menu templates available for 5 or 7 day programs with a variety of different meal type combinations. I'm going to open this up so you guys can see it. So you can just download it, and then there will be all these different little boxes that you can type in. So this really helps ensure menu compliance. Then you can see, make sure that you're putting in all of the required components for all the meals and snacks. And then it does include like the whole grain documentation on the bottom, and it has the milk statement here as well. So kind of a few less things for you all to worry about. Here are production records broken out by age group. Records of meals served. So if you were on Tuesday's call, that is how you document the meals. And then here are some additional resources. I'm trying to think what some of these that we talked about today. The milk worksheet calculation tool that we talked about today is on there. A lot of them are record keeping ones that we talked about on Tuesday. Okay, the meal pattern and policies section has all of the resources we shared today. Whole grains, grain-based desserts, cereal, and sugar limits. This is our meal patterns for infants, children, and adults. And let's see, the civil rights tab has all of our civil rights requirements on here. This link will take you to the Colorado Nutrition Portal. And the final one I'm going to show you all, because it kind of hides down here. This is about the Healthier Meals Initiative, or HMI. So this is where you can access the processed meat handout in English and Spanish. So this will walk you through what the different types of processed meats are, with some great visual examples, as well as some healthier alternatives to give you guys some additional ideas there, and recently translated into Spanish, which is always helpful. Okay, any questions on the website before I walk through one other place where you can find some of our resources? Okay, if ever you can't find anything, just let us know. Again, with all the digital accessibility requirements, not all of our resources are on the website because they're being remediated. So if you ever, need anything, just reach out. Okay, so I'm going to walk you all through the download forms section of the Colorado Nutrition Portal. So all you have to do is go to the applications little tab, and then the download forms section. And this will walk you through, these are all the different categories of documents that are available here. So some of our documents that are no longer on the website are available in here. For example, all of our manuals. So our adult daycare center manual, at risk, child care, family child care home, and our fiscal manual all live in here because they don't have to go through as much remediation for the digital accessibility as all the forms that are public facing. To access these, you have to have a login, so there's a little bit different rules. But there are also additional forms in here like food service management, contract information, budget information, all of our checklists for reviews for all the different program types. Infant forms, management plans, which are required for sponsors of centers, site visit forms, which are required for sponsors of centers, and then additional training documents for yourself or your staff. They're all on here. Okay, I'm going to go back to here. And we did both of those. Okay, so any final questions that anybody has? If not, you can access the post-test and evaluation here. Once those are complete, I will send you your certificate. I'll start sending those tomorrow. Ari is dropping them in the chat box again. Thank you, Ari. And if you all don't have any other questions, feel free to enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for spending your morning with us. We are here to help you if you ever have any more questions. You are so welcome, Teresa. Thank you for coming. All right, well, I'm going to stop the recording and kick everybody out. So we will see you all next time.